The Maormer, the Sea Elves, or Tropical Elves, you can even call them the Fish Elves if you're truly trying to be mean. They are the inhabitants of the island kingdom Pyandania, far to the south of the Somerset Isles. For most of Somerset's history, the Maormer have assailed its shores with invasions and raids in an attempt to reclaim what is supposedly rightfully theirs. This has carried on for millenniums, for the Aldmer have never been able to erase the threat at its core. In the year 486 of the Second Era, a small Maormeri fleet was sighted off the coast of Alinor, and King Hydalyth ordered his navy to give chase. The navy followed the ships through uncharted waters into an ambush in Pyandania itself. Most of the Alinori navy was destroyed, but a single warship returned to Somerset to describe the land as a sea jungle. Massive plateaus spilling over with vegetation form mazes around valleys of ocean. Waving tendrils of kelp trap all but the Maormer's own ships and provide a well-camouflaged home for the sea serpents that are Orgnum's guards and occasional mounts. Mist storms spill over the land, further disorienting one's views. That even one ship survived the visit is a testament to the maritime genius of the Aldmer. Welcome to FudgeMuppet, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Scott, and today we are discussing a wild Elder Scrolls theory, one which we talked about in our Elder Scrolls podcast about the Sea Elves. Is it in fact possible that the Maormer are in fact correct in their claims? Is it possible that these elves are closest to the ancient Aldmer? Perhaps what the High Elves say and profess is actually not the truth of the matter. I mean, you must remember that this is the Elder Scrolls, and there are basically no absolute truths, just lots of likely and less likely scenarios scattered amongst alternative but plausible series of events. Thanks to the unreliable narrator, we have little in the way of concrete information, but then again, that's the beautiful thing that gives us all the wiggle room we need to make wild theories. So come on a journey with me and let's indulge this claim of the Maormer that they are the purest of elves and that the elves of Somerset are the mongrels. Well, first it might be helpful to punch some holes in the Aldmer series of events so that you guys may be open to the idea that the supposed purity and direct line of ancestry for the Aldmer may be wrong. This is what's said about them in the Pocket Guide 3rd edition. The Aldmer, the progenitor races of all elves, arrived in Tamriel from their original home in Aldmeris, or Old Elnefey in ancient times. We don't know what precipitated this exodus, or even the location of Aldmeris, if it still exists today. Most scholars believe that the Aldmer settled Somerset first and then spread out across the rest of Tamriel, but there is some evidence to support the theory that Somerset was only one of several initial settlements of the earliest Aldmer. In any case, Somerset became one of the earliest centers of Aldmer civilization, which developed over thousands of years into the Aldmer of historical times. It also says the Aldmer changed over time culturally according to their new environments, being at first temperamentally and then physically very distinct races separate from one another. The ones who stayed in Somerset became known as the Altmer. In Valenwood, Bosmer, in Morrowind, Kymar, and Dwemer, in Cyrodiil, Aelid, and in High Rock, a mix between Nedic and Aldmer birthed the Bretons. So, in essence, these passages are saying that the order of operations was Aldmer flee Aldmeris, they come to the Somerset Isles, and then afterwards the rest spread throughout Tamriel. Now, we could look to Topal the pilot's exploits detailed in the Father of the Niben and see where some problems arise. He left Somerset to search for Aldmeris and instead discovered the coasts of Tamriel, but among his experiences of its earliest inhabitants are the mysterious cat demons on the coasts of modern-day Elsewhere. These are commonly believed to be the ancestors of the Khajiit, or rather the Khajiit themselves, just not known as such yet. So there are some immediate problems and inconsistencies. You see, the Khajiit believed they were created from elven stock that inhabited the land, chosen by Azura to become the Khajiit. This is quite plausible. Azura, after all, has a penchant for changing elven races. Just look at the Kymar and Dunmer. Now, this supposes the idea that the elven stock must have predated these cat demons that Topal discovered, because the Khajiit had to be made from the elves that were there before. But according to Topal, Tamriel was new, and there were no elves on Tamriel at this time. What is interesting is that their neighbours, the Wood Elves, also claim that they were originally from Valenwood. They claim that they were once part of the Ooze, a formless chaos that was then given shape by Ifri and the Green Pact, which gave birth to the Wood Elves as we know them today. So these two elven groups of southern Tamriel, according to them, must have predated Topol and other Aldmeri exploration of Tamriel in order for him to experience these cat demons, aka ancient Khajiit. The Pocket Guide 3rd edition also says the hist trees of Blackmarsh, most say, were the original life forms on our continent, followed by the progenitors of the modern Khajiit, the modern Argonian, the modern Slode, the modern Dreg, and other beast folk, some now gone our land, some so shy or rare that their presence is seldom detected. But this again would not stack up with the entirety of Khajiit or Bosmer belief as they originated in Tamriel, according to them. We must also consider that certain other elves have no direct explained migratory route to their creation or existence. For example, we have the Dwemer, who were said to have been in Morrowind before Chimer arrival, and we also have the Falmer, the Snow Elves, who have no direct explanation of how these pale elves of the north came to be. To clarify, this does not mean that they are not related via Aldmeri migration, but their existence is not explained like the Aelids, Chimer, or Dureni, who all left Somerset Isles at some point, sharing a common ancestry and culture. You guys are just gonna have to trust me, this is still a video about sea elves, but there's a lot of background info that needs to be established in order to have this crazy Maormer the true elves theory to have any respectable amount of credence. It is entirely possible that, like the Khajiit and Bosmer, that the Falmer and Dwemer have always dwelt in Tamriel, contrary to imperial understandings of the world via the pocket guides. A key piece to the puzzle is Aldmeris itself, because there are various understandings of this mythical, mysterious place of old. Some believe it to be a literal lost island where the Aldmer came from, others believe it to be a metaphorical ideal, and others believe it to be a sundered continent that no longer exists. Listen to the annotated Annuad, a commonly referenced piece of information which is a simplified version of the creation myth sourced from the Mythic Era, also known as the Merethic Era. On the world of Nirn, all was chaos. The only survivors of the 12 worlds of creation were the Elnafey and the Hist. The Elnafey are the ancestors of Mer and Men. The Hist are the trees of Argonia. Nirn originally was all land with interspersed seas but no oceans. A large fragment of the Elnafey world landed on Nirn relatively intact, and the Elnafey living there were ancestors of the Mer. These Elnafey fortified their borders from the chaos outside, hid their pocket of calm, and attempted to live on as before. Other Elnafey arrived on Nirn, scattered amid the confused jumble of the shattered worlds, wandering and finding each other over the years. Eventually, the wandering Elnafey found the hidden land of Old Elnafey, and were amazed and joyful to find their kin living amid the splendor of ages past. The wandering Elnafey expected to be welcomed into the peaceful realm, but the Old Elnafey looked on them as degenerates fallen from their former glory. For whatever reason, war broke out and raged across the whole of Nirn. The Old Elnafey retained their ancient power and knowledge, but the Wanderers were more numerous and toughened by their long struggle to survive on Nirn. This war reshaped the face of Nirn, sinking much of the land beneath new oceans and leaving the lands as we know them: Tamriel, Akavir, Atmora, and Yakuta. The old Elnafey realm, although ruined, became Tamriel. The remnants of the Wanderers were left divided on the other 3 continents. So let's annotate the annotated Annuad and explain in the simplest terms what this all means. The old Elnafey, the ancestors of the Elves, had a solid realm which they literally called Old Elnafey. Just remember that the term Old Elnafey gets used to refer to both Aldmeris, the place, and ancestors of the Mer. But I said simple, so this area was Aldmeris. The wandering Elnafey, ancestors of men, were happy to have found Aldmeris, but the old Elnafey told them to get stuffed, you're not coming in, so a war ensued, and this sundered the continent into 4: Tamriel, Akavir, Atmora, and Yakuta. So if I were to run with this sundered continent idea of Aldmeris, then technically all elves came from Aldmeris, but Aldmeris was sundered and its remnant became Tamriel. Now look, this is all Dawn Era stuff, lots of myth and legend, plenty of crazy conjecture, but the takeaway here is that is it possible that the Bosmer, elven precursors of Khajiit, the Dwemer, Falmer, etc. were all on Tamriel since the Dawn Era? It could be that the Aldmer who found Somerset were lost at sea during the Cataclysmic War and have since been obsessed with finding a place that no longer exists as they knew it. Long story short, The creation of an actual world is very confusing, mostly relegated to the realm of myth, and the Ultima version of events is only professed because they were the dominant culture on Tamriel for so long and established many of the fundamentals of modern Tamrielic society, such as elements of the speech and writing, as well as most arts, crafts, sciences, and laws of the empires of man. However, when you look past the Thalmor propaganda, you may find that the claims the elves of the Somerset Isles profess are in reality just as uncertain about their supposed ancestral homeland of Aldmeris as any other elf is, and that their understanding is mostly a mythical one. Okay, so now that we've established conventional Ultima ideas are not infallible and that alternatives are available, let's get to this Maormer thing. Let's have a look at what the Maormer claim to be the truth. The Sea Lord Malaroth of Pyandonia says, many still believe that the Maormer race of Pyandonia diverged from the racial line of the Ultima when they were exiled from Somerset Isle as criminals. This is the great traitorous lie of the Ultima. Translations of tapestries in the Crystal Tower reveal that the great Maormer race is directly descended from the purest strain of our Aldmeri ancestors. We certainly did not come from Somerset, but originated in our ancestral homeland of Aldmeris. The Ultima themselves are a mongrel race. They are the abomination that drove our great leader Orgnum to lead our people through the impenetrable mists to our haven of Pyandonia. For centuries we have marshalled our forces in preparation for our triumphant return. Somerset is ours, by our right of birth as the one true Aldmeri race. All trace of the inferior Ultima race and their mongrel blood must be wiped from the face of Tamriel. Our time has come. Arise, Maormer, take your place as rightful heirs to the Aldmeri legacy. Though on the contrary, Hayden Drill of Skywatch says, I fear the fallibility we have developed in our fall from Aldmeri grace has led to the common misconception that we are close siblings to those who dwell in Pyandonia, but the truth of the matter is that we are far distant cousins with only a shred of common ancestry. This welcome revelation comes from previously untranslated Aldmeri tapestries within the Crystal Tower. The unmitigated truth revealed at last, after painstaking study, speaks not of a common plight of reluctant migration and tragic diaspora, but a tale of treachery and exile. Now, it's hard to say which is propaganda and which is truth, but let's for a moment indulge the idea that perhaps the Ultima do not like what the tapestries of the Crystal Tower in fact say, and simply translate them differently to fit their own narrative. Is it actually possible that King Orgnum and his folk were banished from Aldmeris during the time when it was still one continent? Perhaps there were disputes about how they should deal with the incoming invaders, the wandering Elnefe. Perhaps it was simply a dispute over the throne. Perhaps these two factions were lost to sea, and in search for Aldmeris, one found Somerset and one found Pyandonia. Perhaps the Sea Elves see Somerset as the last identifiable piece of Aldmeris, the rest having changed drastically. Who knows? The Third Pocket Guide says, Orgnum, their leader and self-styled king, according to the legend, was a phenomenally wealthy Aldmer nobleman who used his finances to launch a rebellion against the powers of the land. He and his followers were banished for this to a place separated from Aldmeris by an impenetrable mist, Pyandonia, the Veil of Mist. This boundary proved so effective that the followers of Orgnum never again disturbed their former countrymen. The new Aldmeri homeland of Somerset, however, was not so lucky. Ultimately, there is a lot of he said, she said going on, but I wanted to point out just how the High Elves' claim to being the purest descendants of the Ultima is just as valid or invalid as the Maormer's claim, because it's all based on their own mythical stories of heritage rather than strict historical evidence. Like I briefly mentioned before, Aldmeris could also be an ideal, a metaphor for a pure, Adric, elven civilization that is closer to the divine, yet a place that never did or will exist. But let's look at some biology. We all assume that the Ultima most closely resemble the Aldmer. Why? Because they said so. We do not have the Falmer opinion or the Dwemer opinion. Perhaps the Bosmer would think the High Elves were created from the ooze just the same, shaped by different gods to Ifri. It's important to be open-minded here, but What if the Maormer were the ones who most closely resembled the Aldmer, or the proto-elf? Take away for the moment your preconceived notion of what an Aldmer looks like. Before they were Aldmer, they were Old Elnefe. Now, Elnefe were a group of Et Arda, which means original spirits, so it's reasonably fair to imagine them as not entirely physical. If we actually look at the Elnefe who did not become the races of men and mer, the ones that became the Earthbones, they can still be seen as guardians of nature who look rather ethereal and spirit-like. So then let's look at the Maormer's physical description. They are known to possess a strange chameleon-like skin, an involuntary process that is similar to the forest coupling skills of the Bosmer, and we see them in person in the Elder Scrolls Online. They possess elven-like ears along with these milky, kind of undefined eyes and sort of translucent pearlish white skin. Now these base elves are different from the Leviathans, which are scaled and monstrous, made from the sorcerous coupling of sea elf and sea serpent. Interestingly, that in itself is another example of elves transforming, and there are plenty of examples that seem to allude to the idea that the elves seem more fluid in their physical forms when compared to men. But I digress. Look at the Maormer and imagine that these are the very first transitory forms of Elnefe to Aldmer. Imagine that the first transition from spiritual to corporeal looked rather strange. Its physicality was not yet defined by the same skin and colour that is shared by later descendants. Maybe all the Aldmer elves looked like the Maormer, but after Orgnum's rebellion, he was exiled to Pyandonia, where they stayed mostly unchanged except for some subtle features in the ear or other changes brought on by sorceries, as is the case with the Leviathans. Perhaps the fact that they can change their form with sorcery lends credence to the idea that they are closer to the Aldmer, a sort of elven protoform, if you will, which is perhaps more easily changed compared to others. As for the rest of the Aldmer, they shaped and changed and became the Elves of Tamriel with more defined and mortal appearances. Milky, vague eyes turned to eyes of bright colours with clear pupils and iris. Skin developed colour of different hues, along with hairs of golds and browns. Their appearances were made like the other mortals and creatures as reality was made concrete and Lorkhan's treachery complete. While not a piece of evidence as such, I will say that thematically, this kind of aquatic jellyfish-like appearance fits our ideas of what an evolutionary ancestor may look like, considering that in our world, aquatic creatures were the first, hence we usually think of them as prehistoric and ancient. So thematically, it's easy enough to see the Maormer with their physical descriptions as a sort of protoform, which would become the more familiar land elves we see. Also, to continue to challenge the ideas of the Aldmer, if I took all the sea-themed armor and weapons and clothing from them and put the base Maormer on the moon and said that they're moon elves, I think most would simply accept that. Their alien appearance does not look strictly aquatic, at least to me. And remember, I'm talking about the pearly-skinned base stock, not the Leviathans which have been changed by serpentine sorcery. Look, I don't know if they are the true Aldmer and the Altmer are the mongrel race as they say, but I think it is an often overlooked possibility, mainly because of the Altmer dogma that claims to be the truth. But it is a narrative that is filled with many gaps and mythical explanations that run contrary to the ancestral tales of other elves or elven derivatives such as the Bosmer of Valenwood or the Khajiit of Elsewhere, who were changed by Azura from elven stock. You may not be convinced by the end of the video, but at the very least I hope you have had your Elder Scrolls worldview changed and have been made aware that Altmeri dogma is not strictly true and just as susceptible to subjective mythical narrative that does not equate to an all-encompassing evidence-based worldview. History is skewed by the first to write it, and it just so happens that the Altmer had the head start on civilization in Tamriel. But remember, it's always healthy to question your Thalmor overlords. Thanks so much for watching the video, guys. I hope you enjoyed this titillating discussion. I would love to hear your thoughts below. What was or where is Aldmeris? Are the Maormer right? Are the Altmer right? Or are they just both foolish races who are hung up on ideals of ancient homelands and common ancestors that may have never even existed? It is a conundrum, to be sure. If you want to see the origin of this idea and you are interested in the Maormer as a whole, do be sure to check out our recent Elder Scrolls podcast we did on them. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Thanks again so much for watching. My name is Scott from FudgeMuppet, and I'll be back to nerd out with you again next time.